This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 115.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am Ramsey, your host of We the Sales Engineers Podcast, with your co-host here, Beardy McBearden. What the hell is happening?
Yep, pretty much. I'm actually getting kicked out of my house and moving into the woods next week, so I thought I'd, look the part.
Again, if you just want to hop onto YouTube, just check out Benny's face, and then you can go back to listening normally. You should do that. It's a site for to make eyes sore, I guess.
Yeah.
Not a site for sore eyes. So today we have an amazing guest, Gary Sloper, former leader in Oracle, SE leader and customer success leader, who just left to start his own business, which is awesome. I don't know. I find a lot of SEs end up doing that, but we're not talking about how SEs can leave their companies to start their own business. We're going to talk about leadership mainly with Gary and how good leaders work with their SEs. So last week we had Mike Shore on, and we talked about how leaders can kind of help their SEs to get a better relationship with their account managers and all that. We're not going to talk about any of that today. We're just talking about performance, SE performance, and getting better as SEs, working with customer success and all that. So,
Which is a pretty interesting point in and of itself, right? Kind of that marrying of customer success and SEing as well. So, like, while we did talk in depth, and as you'll soon hear, about SEs and their relationship with their SE leaders and how SE leaders can make their SEs great, understanding too our larger part in the overall, or rather our part in the larger organization beyond our relationship with just sales, which is what we mostly talk about, was also really important. So like to really understand how you could have an institutional relationship with CS, and to see a lot of organizations moving in that direction was personally very eye-opening. But yeah, a lot of great topics all around today.
Yeah, and Gary has his own podcast. You can find it in the show notes. It is called Solutions for Customers. So check it out. It's an interesting podcast. Like he does pretty much what we do. He interviews other SEs, although he has 20 years of experience. I'm not like he can talk for hours about sales engineering, but I think I don't think he enjoys talking about himself as much as he enjoys asking questions. So I guess that's a natural SE for you. So yeah, let's before we jump into the show, leave a rating and review on your favorite whatchamacallit. I have a goal. I want to reach 10,000 downloads a month by end of September. Right? We got to a point where we're getting 3,000 downloads a month, but due to COVID, it dropped. So let's say right now I'm at 1,869 downloads. By the end of this month, by the end of June, I would like to be at 4,000. So I hope everybody can help me out with that by letting people know about this podcast. People who would gain something from it, not just send it to your mother because you want to help with the download, although I appreciate the gesture. I want this to help as many people as possible. So if you can help me out, even if you don't want to leave a rating or review, share it with somebody. Look at your phone, find someone you think would be interested in this podcast and text them this podcast and gently order them to listen to it. So let's jump into the show. Hey, Gary. Welcome to the show. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. You had me on your podcast like last week. We did the recording.
Yeah, it's going to come out here in the next week. I'm excited about it. Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear that. And welcome to our show. We're happy to have you here as well because you have a little bit more experience than I do. Maybe you can introduce yourself to the folks listening.
Sure. Gary Sloper. I've been in the industry about 20 years. Predominantly in pre-sales. So I've led large and small organizations throughout my career. At CenturyLink, I spent about 10 years there, ran about a 300-person organization. Most recently, I just came out of Oracle through an acquisition from a company called Dyn. And that company, when we exited, was about 450 total employees, so a much smaller team, just under 100 SEs and customer success individuals in my org. But I love what I do. I love this part of the practice and the tech ecosystem, and just excited to be here and and just rap a little bit about what I've learned, and hopefully I can help some folks.
Yeah. So I have around 6 years experience. You have around 20. So I'm almost there. I'll catch up to you one day. I am curious.
But I will tell you though, just because you don't have the same amount of numbers, what I've found is that it changes so quickly. So your experience, maybe not in years, but in practice of what you're doing, it's probably exceeding what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So don't sell yourself short on that.
Well, I do appreciate that, and I'll. Well, all right. Well, let's just leave it at that. Thank you for that, making me feel better on my own show. I do want to talk about for a second. Like you went from a small company and you were acquired by a big company. What's the difference in culture between having a small company? Is there a difference in culture, or how did that affect the SE team in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every company has a different culture. So whether you're going from one large company to another large company, it's still going to be a different culture. And I think that's really the tone that's set by the management in place and the employees that are rolling up into that. For us, it was certainly different. I mean, you went from, being a 400 plus person organization, being able to get things done in a different manner than going into a 144,000 person organization. So if you think about product enhancements and escalations and the processes that exist or don't exist between the two companies, absolutely. But I think what's interesting for anyone in sales engineering that has gone from a small company and been acquired to a larger company, I think you have to use it as a learning experience. You're going to get exposed to different technology no matter what, but going through that process and that journey as a professional will only make you a better sales engineer in the long run. At times it may feel frustrating and kind of lonely as you're going into some of these bigger companies. But it is a process. And I think what it does is it creates some callus around your personal brand and how you conduct business. And you do get exposure to different customers at times as well. When you're a smaller company, and if you've worked in that type of environment, anybody on the show that's listening knows that it can be an uphill battle to try to get a meeting with JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America. You go into a large company, like in my example, CenturyLink and Oracle and a couple of those, they typically are already doing business with those organizations. So now you're architecting and working with some of these organizations in a different manner that you may not have the exposure in a small company. So I always tell my teams and anybody that I've ever worked with, use every experience and take that and learn from it, because this is a long game. Don't look at it as a short game.
That's really good advice, just all around. I do want to ask you another quick little question with respect to maybe a little bit of a difference between your experience at a smaller company versus big ones. And it's also maybe going to lead into some other topics for later on in the conversation. But you mentioned that the organization had about 400 people over at Dyn, and about a quarter of that kind of fell under your mandate of being both, I guess, SEs and falling under CS as well. I guess maybe just an initial question, and then my actual question will come after. The initial question would be, what was the split between the two? I'd imagine you wouldn't have 50 SEs and 50 CS people. So maybe just that really quickly. But then after that, what's the difference, I suppose, in that dynamic between, say, sales engineering and CS? How does that look differently for a smaller organization versus one like Oracle?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot to kind of dissect there. I'd say, no, it's great, because I have this conversation daily with folks, especially that run sales. They know how to really run a sales organization well. They've perfected that over the last 20 plus years. But when it comes to what I would call the superlatives of pre-sales and customer success, there's different schools of thought. There's a lot of information on customer success today and how that has played, especially in the SaaS world. There's a lot of metrics. If you look at, Michael Skock, he's kind of one of the I would say the founders of some of those metrics, just from a VC perspective, because they have, kind of a requirement in their portfolio for performance and other things. But when I look at, so if I look at my Dyn experience, it was a very small team. And the challenge, when you have a small team, is that you're having to wear a lot of different hats. And that's a good thing as you're starting out, right? You have to build those relationships, because you have to put those chips in the bank. And I think every sales engineer, regardless of the organization that they're at, has that same requirement, because there may be a time where you have to deposit those chips, due to a product feature or an outage or something that even though you're not responsible for, you're still looked as the customer steward, the advocate in that account. So when I look at, smaller companies in my own experience, it gives you that opportunity to touch a lot, but it also removes your ability at times to move forward in the sales process. So if you are the sales engineer holding the customer success role, holding the technical account management role, and doing implementations and everything else, it takes away from that frontline sales opportunity of growing your existing base or finding net new logos. And so one of the opportunities that I loved about Dyn was, they were in this growth period of, we're working with some of the largest cloud native brands in the world. You talk about Netflix and Twitter and others, but we haven't built that customer success team. So what we did is we built a customer success organization that helped with technical account management. So once we've sold an opportunity, how do we implement that? And then after we've implemented that, how does a CSM focus on, the caring and feeding of that account, looking for expansion opportunities to then bring that cycle back in. And so many of the folks that were naturally in a sales engineering role wanted to move into that technical account management role because they enjoyed just working with that same customer or that base of accounts daily to help them install, but also talk about future enhancements. And then others wanted to stay in that pre-sales role of, continuously working with net new customers and working on demos and going through that sales cycle. And then we also brought in other individuals for that. So the opportunity for me personally to help that organization was I was able to help uplift the sales engineering organization, but then also build out this TAM and CSM team. And I think that's a little bit easier to do in a smaller company personally, because especially if it's never been there, it's that first groundbreaking territory. And when you're a small startup of 20 people, you have to wear all those roles. And I think one of the biggest, things that it's not really, I guess, agreed upon as well in the industry. In my opinion, everyone has to be in customer success. That starts the CEO down. So you may have somebody in the formal title role that is measured and compensated and focused on their MBOs every day for that customer role as a customer success manager, but it has to start with the CEO. If you're just looking for a group of folks to go manage that for you, in my opinion, you'll fail. You won't hit your pinnacle. So I think in that smaller organization, and it also allows you to do some trial and error, right? Because if you're a 144,000 person organization, you want to make those changes in a global org. That's much harder to do and roll out and execute and communicate to your customer base versus a small company. You may say, hey, we don't need a technical account manager. We just need a pre-sales engineer and a post-sales engineer that works in a customer success capacity, and let's go make that happen. And then as we scale, we can start planning out what that looks like in the future. So, I think the other challenge too is that we have to remember, especially as SEs, that customers are super product fatigued right now. They have everybody trying to tell them that their product, their piece of software, their solution will be the panacea to make them achieve greatness in their organization. And so that's why CIOs aren't calling people back. They're not answering emails. And so you have that finite window on the pre-sale side, but even on the post-sale side, there's been many times where we've sold a solution and the customer is just so busy, they don't want to turn that up. And then you start looking at metrics that has implications as well, even potential churn in the future. So I think to answer your question on comparing those organizations, I think it's a lot easier. What I look at, each organization is different. So when I look at the ratios and how I allocate those resources, really depends upon who I'm supporting, what the customer base is, what is our go-to-market strategy? Because if we're going to go add 20 different products, I can't have, the SE team really be dangerous in 20 different things. So if we're going to go do things differently, I have to think about how I manage that. If it's 1-2 products, different conversations. So that's why I think, kind of we were talking about before the show, like building your own manual in your organization. I don't think it's a rinse and repeat. I think for us and what we do, the solutions may look similar, but how we execute it has to be customized for every company.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that whole thing you mentioned too around companies having to be customer centric from the CEO down. I mean, it makes sense in many respects. As good as new logos are, I mean, a company is only as good, I guess, as they're likely to exist for, I suppose. So, I mean, without existing happy customers, you're probably not running the best business in any respect. So, yeah, it's really important to make sure that you retain what you keep, and obviously attract more people as well throughout. But otherwise, yeah, that makes sense around structure as well. So, thank you for that insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I mean, it's really hard to close customers right now in this industry. A lot of different variables, and it's really easy to lose a customer. So very simple methodology when you're in an organization is just to think about it that way. If I'm a sales engineer, I got to work extra hard to bring that customer in. Once they're in, I got to make sure that they don't want to ever leave.
Right.
Yeah. And it's much easier to sell to an existing customer than it is to find a new one. So there's always
Absolutely.
an emphasis on keeping the customers happy, or hopefully there's always an emphasis on keeping the customers happy. Otherwise, it's going to be a continuous cycle where you find new ones, lose old ones, and it's not non-repeatable revenue. So in terms of sales engineering itself, there are books about sales engineering, right? But I am a very different sales engineer than Benny, and I'm probably a very different sales engineer than you. I'm a different sales engineer than my colleagues in the same company. So how can we actually work on figuring out what's our style? What is our process? Like basically building our own manual so that we can be sales engineers.
Yeah. So I think if you're in an existing organization, I mean, there's some, like you mentioned, there's some great books out there. I think it really comes down to the SE leadership first. You know, if you are a leader and are not continuing to develop your SE team, I'm not talking about the technical pieces, but the superlatives of making that sales engineer a better professional for your organization, but also your customer and the team that he or she is supporting in the field. If you're not doing that, then you can read all the books you want, and it's not gonna make a difference. I think as leaders and folks that are aspiring to be leaders in the SE industry really need to understand that, you know, our practice is much different than the sales training that exists. I mean, granted, we should go through the sales training because it's very important, but the empathy and compassion that we have to display as leaders, and hopefully that transcends back down into the teams is paramount. So I feel that you know, there has to be ongoing open communication about internal development for your teams. So it's not once a quarter, it's not end of year, hey, here's the MBOs that we put together. It is a ongoing coaching approach, but not, you know, overcrowding somebody. You don't have to be on them every single day. What are you doing here? Why are you making these decisions? It's more about, you know, how do we guide and shepherd those SEs to greatness? And sometimes it's, hey, they understand the technology better than us as leaders, or even sometimes better than the product team. And they're not shy to talk about that, right? How many SEs have come out and said, hey, I could build a better product? But I think it's the soft skills of not just the problem solving, but the controlling of the learning curve, the communication skills, the being able to handle difficult situations with difficult customers and difficult sales goals and individuals. And those aren't in books. I mean, there's some out there that talk about certain things, but our industry is changing so much that's why I feel as leaders, we have to continue to develop ourselves to transcend that down. I think if you look across a lot of the organizations today, many SE leaders are promoted simply because they were the best engineer. And sometimes, you know, I've done a lot of surveys, a lot of my friends in the industry, oftentimes 25% of them didn't really want to get into management. It was kind of thrust upon them. And I think we need to take a step back. And if you're a sales engineer or solution architect or solution engineer, whatever it's called in your organization, there's nothing wrong with you being in that role for 30 years. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't see DevOps engineers automatically say, hey, I have to go be the VP of product. They're very good at their craft. It's no different than sales professionals. Some sales professionals never want to get into management. So I think one of the challenges that really exist at the top is many CROs and VP of sales who do not fully understand our practice simply will promote that individual because they are the best engineer. And what that does, Ramsey, is that it ends up creating kind of a cascade effect downward, because they're not natural leaders for individuals. They're leaders in their trade and their practice. And so you start to have this culture that doesn't fully gravitate to greatness where it could if it had the right setup. I don't know if that completely answered your question, because I kind of went a little off, but it's more of like a passion of mine. But that's kind of what I'm seeing. I mean, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Well, but it answered a different question, but that works for me. Don't worry. We'll go with this. So I've noticed myself that, generally speaking, people tend to promote rockstar SEs into management SEs. And my experience is that rockstar SEs who become managers don't know how to manage it because they're rock stars because it's natural to them.
Right.
They don't know all the trials and tribulations of someone like me who doesn't know what they're doing, or for a while didn't know what I was doing. And they wouldn't know how to teach me how to change things around. They just assume that everybody should be able to do what they did. So I agree with you. The question is, if someone's being pushed into that role, how do they say no to their boss without stepping on toes or without looking like they're not interested in helping the company? How does one do that?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say you have every right to do that. And there shouldn't be any sort of retribution. I've seen individuals push back and say, no, I don't want to. And the reason why is that leader will say, well, okay, if they're not going to do it, then it's still not a bad situation. I have this rock star SC that will continue to be a rock star for us. So I think the best approach would be to almost go in as an SC and say, why do you think I'm the best leader for this role? And let the VP kind of explain, oh, the tech, and you're really good with the product folks. But if the answers you're hearing are nothing to have to do with actually building a sales engineering team and cultivating that, then you take that back and use that back to say, hey, I agree with what you're saying. I think I do a good job in all these areas, but I think what we're both not hearing is my ability to probably go and lead this team to go grow that 20% and cultivate a culture. I think my strengths are being an individual contributor leader on a team to help build that culture. And I don't think that I would be set up for success if I were to be put into that type of a scenario. Now, a good salesperson will continue to put the sale on the person, but they shouldn't feel pressure. I think what you have to do is continue to almost be that SE and almost oversell back that this is not something I'm comfortable with, but let me explain why. And it has nothing to do with, not wanting to be a leader in your organization. I think I can actually just do so much damage as a sales engineer for you as an individual contributor on your big deals. And I have to believe that there's somebody that has more experience out there that I would absolutely love and welcome the opportunity to go work for. And I think that's probably the way that I would start the conversation.
Yeah, I can see that going over pretty well. One of the things too that they had talked about a lot for a lot of leaders, and I've experienced this a lot, in some leadership seminars, and it just comes up as a relatively intuitive thing. This idea of emotional intelligence as well, where a lot of really good leaders nowadays, they just need to have this emotional intelligence to be able to kind of understand their teams a lot better and understand the various personalities and whatnot within. And so if you come into a conversation as an individual contributor with that type of self-awareness, you're almost handing to your leader on a silver platter exactly kind of what's going on in your head, and you're articulating that quite nicely, which I'd like to hope that if they do have a strong EI, that they're going to be, that'll resonate strongly with them. But I think that also, if one has a strong emotional intelligence, will almost speak a little bit to how they can work with different types of SEs in their respective scenarios. So kind of going to this idea of, people have different learning styles. That's hotly debated in many respects, but it does go to speak to this idea that, some people maybe learn better doing one thing one way versus somebody else could do an equally effective job doing it an entirely different way. And so understanding your team is paramount. And so if you're a leader, I would imagine that doesn't maybe have the best sense of kind of the personalities on their team and how they best like to work. That might be something that'll go a long way in understanding that and understanding how to kind of bring your team to greatness, because each of their individual potentials and their unique ways of getting there, but you can't get them you can't get them there using the same method.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think as part of that conversation back, I think you can also explain to that leader, look, I'm going to support whoever you hire, and I'm going to help enable them on the technology. You know that I know this inside and out. I'm not, I'm here to be a team player. I just don't feel that I can achieve that leadership level, but I'd rather do it in my own right. And I can tell you, 99% of the sales leaders, because most of the time we report into the sales leadership team, uh, they'll look at that and say, wow, that was very articulate, well thought out. I'm glad you're bringing this to my attention. Sometimes, the sales leadership will also move down that path because they think that that is the next progression, and that if they don't promote that rock star SC, that SC will naturally leave the organization. So I think if you start establishing that sales VP or CRO will probably have much more respect for you because you stood up, you talked about what you wanted to do, and he or she in the back of their mind may not have really thought of you as the next leader. They may have somebody else in mind, but they felt that was the only way to keep you. And this is a huge area that I've worked with a lot of external HR leaders in different organizations because they don't know how to hold sales engineering and sales engineering leadership accountable. So I help them with that, and that's an exact example. So I think the other piece that you touched upon is having that high emotional intelligence. I always recommend for my teams nowadays, and I've been exposed to it in a couple of different companies, but go buy the book Strength Finders. If you haven't, it has a code in there that you basically do a survey to figure out where your strengths are. And it's mind-blowing because it will get you down to a T. And I think that's important because once you know the type of personality you are and kind of what your strengths and maybe some of your weaknesses are, it allows you to understand like how to do those things. Like I know where I'm good at and what I'm not good at on the emotional intelligence side. And I think that's something we all have to be open to. But I think that's what really makes a good SE is somebody that has a high emotional intelligence. Anybody can go learn the tech, but how do you understand that, be compassionate, empathetic, for example, with your customers and the teams that you're supporting? To me, that's, I'll go hire those folks all day long. And as a leader, I want to surround myself with people that are better than me, both emotionally and technically, because that makes a better organization. The problem with a lot of SC leaders today is that they feel that they have to be the smartest person in the room. They have to have all the answers. They have to surround themselves with everybody that looks, sounds, and has a background similar to theirs. I love blowing that up. And like any of my leaders that have been under me and folks that will probably end up listening to the show when I send it to them, they'll be like, yeah, Gary's absolutely right. We all disagreed with each other on team calls, but we all walked away in unison because we challenged each other. And that's how you grow as an individual, as an SC, and as an SC leader.
Amazing. Thank you.
I have so many questions about this, but let me
Sure.
step back. You mentioned that they promote the SE to a management position just to keep them. Now, I know many SEs who remain individual contributors, but they come to a point where there is no more promotion, like there is no more salary increase, but people always want a salary increase. Do you define or do you build like a structure within the individual contributors where their, I guess, area of influence gets larger, which means their income gets larger with it? Or like, how does it work? Or do they just stay at that salary range for 30 years? And how does that work in your mind?
Yeah. So I've had this conversation so many times with SEs. They get to a point where they look at it and they say, okay, I've hit the ceiling on my total on target earnings, and I feel that I'm carrying the sales team. I'm doing all the work, or maybe the customer just gravitates to them naturally. And I think that's where an SE has to decide if the income and unlimited capability is my priority, then you probably should go into sales. It's not a bad thing. Some of the best salespeople I know are former SEs. If you are looking at it saying, I like what I do and I don't want to move out of this role, but I would like additional compensation, that unfortunately sometimes you're still capped by a ceiling, your base salary and a variable. It really depends upon the organization. I think the leader of that team has to continue to work with their HR and his or her leadership to make sure that the SC team is on par based on industry standards. Different cities, different regions of the country pay differently based on cost of living. But what unfortunately happens is in many organizations, they don't keep up because they don't have that right information. So some of the data that I feed back to HR teams is, hey, here's what you should be paying for this type of caliber person based on this background. You're 20% underwater. You have a huge opportunity of flight risk. But to your point, I think to your question more specifically is, yes, there you will hit that cap. And I think you have to either decide, do I like what I'm doing in the organization I'm working at? And I will give faith that eventually the organization will continue to give me a standard of living increase, or, there is an uncapped model at some point for my variable. Or do I have to look at something else, whether it's whether it's a team, like a sales team in the organization, move into sales, or exit the company. And I think a lot of SEs go through this internal challenge that they have constantly. They're like, I like where I'm at. I like my friends that I work with. I like the team, but man, I should be getting $20,000 more, and I'm not getting it here. So they'll complain, but they won't necessarily do anything. I think what happens is that as SEs, no matter how much we say we embrace change, the only change that most SEs embrace is learning new technology. They tend to not want to leave their role or work for somebody else. They like that constant, which isn't a bad thing. It's actually admirable, right? They're very loyal. They overlook a lot of things that go on. But I think sometimes SEs, just need that venting option. So it really depends, Ramsey. I think, if, like I said, if compensation is the most important thing, then you have to go find where you can get the most compensation. But I think most SEs look at it and say, I realize the company won't pay me more, but the other things outweigh the compensation. So it's each individual case basis. And as a leader, I've personally taken folks and said, listen, I understand this is the best I can do, but I'll help you go find something else, whether, internally, or find another role for you. And people look at me at first, they're like, why would you do that? He or she's your best SE, or they've done so much. But if I don't do that, some other company is going to go do that. So would it be better to have that employee staying on our team as a company versus going someplace else? And as a leader, I can't be self-conscious and trying to, kind of hoard the talent, because that's not fair to the employee that's, looking up to me to look out for their best interest.
Yeah, this is interesting. Like, you have loyalty towards your company, like you as a leader, you have loyalty towards your company, but you also have loyalty towards your employees. And you kind of have to balance that. And that's not always a position you want to be in, right?
No.
Or that's the tough part, I guess, about leadership, which not many people talk about. But like, I applaud you for being able to actually try to help people move within your company, because that shows loyalty to both. So
yeah, well, I mean, we've all worked for bosses or leaders that were awesome. You're like, I'll run through a brick wall for her. She was my best boss I've ever had. And others, you're like, that guy can't tie his own shoes. And why would I want to do anything for him? Because he's the first one to not even look out for me. So I always believe that it's my responsibility as a leader in this ecosystem and what we do to continue to foster an environment where I'm going to push you as hard as you've ever been pushed as an SC. But equally, you need to push me back. You need to make sure that I'm holding myself accountable to build your career, that I'm giving you all the tools and resources to build your career, to make sure that I'm looking at ways to elevate your career. And if I'm not doing that, then why am I even in this position?
So about that, going back to my question of building a manual, let's say I come into your company. How do you and I work together to build like my career, where I want to go, what I want to achieve it? Is it something that you're expecting me to come up with, or is it something you're coming up with? How does it work as a partnership between an SE and an SE leader?
Yeah, good question. So hopefully we've already had part of this conversation during the interview process, because if we haven't, then I've failed to understand what your motive is outside of just coming to the company, right? So I always ask, and it's not, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I try to understand, like, what is your one-page plan? And sometimes SEs are like, I don't have one. I've never really thought about it. Okay. Well, that's the first thing we need to do. Like when you come in, let's figure out what it is that you want to do professionally for the company, and other interests that you have externally. So what blows my mind is, there's many times where in marketing teams, they go out and they put out all this content and they try to add all this, these technical white papers, and they don't look at the SE team to actually help them with that. So there's many SEs that are like, listen, I want to learn the tech, but I'd like to be kind of an evangelist and go and do some tech talks or blog posts or sit on a panel. Like those are easy things as a leader for me to go make that happen for you. And sometimes the SEs are like, I just know I have to go do it because it's getting me out of my comfort zone versus me going and doing the same demo 20 times over. So when I have an employee, the first thing I want to do is just kind of level set on that. The second thing is to get a good understanding of their background. So we put this program together. It's called Levels of Understanding, and based on our product set and or anything that's applicable to the industry. So if I were to come to you, Ramsey, and say, all right, walk me through your understanding of layer 1 through 3. Talk to me about, IPv4, v6. Talk to me about your ability to really understand SD-WAN. And I have you self-evaluate yourself, and then I go in and I evaluate you as well. And the whole idea is to kind of build a heat map for you day one and figure out how we control that heat map over the next 30, 60, 90 days, and eventually a year, 2 years. And that holds me accountable to say, okay, hey, we've both agreed on things. And sometimes SEs are harder. They're like, well, I really understand IPv6, but I've never deployed it in an actual live infrastructure. I'm like, yeah, but that's not what I'm asking you. Like you understand the concepts. Granted, a lot of customers haven't, re-IP'd yet. So I think that's where, we need to sit down. And then what other things? Like, there's two core areas right now that everybody really should be focusing on that's driving everything. And that's understanding how the internet works and understanding how cloud works. So if you don't understand how routing and switching at a high level, at a macro level, and how the internet works, you got to go figure that out. And so I got to go help you with that. And then if you don't understand how really cloud works, then let's get you at least some Amazon courses so you understand that. So it's like building this kind of one-page plan specific for you as an employee. And then it could be, as we progress, because I'm not going to know everything day one, but my job through one-on-ones and observing you in your daily work life with customers, it might be additional training. It could be, let's talk about how to do presentation skills a little bit better. And it's not necessarily sending you to a class. It could just be, I want you to record yourself on these 3 topics, give a 5-minute presentation. And it's not anything about technology. It might be, you talk to me about what it's like to live in Canada for 5 minutes. And if you stumble on that topic, then I know the topic inside and out. It's your delivery, right? It has nothing to do with the technology. So it's breaking down a lot of these barriers as you're building out this coaching plan. And it's different for every SE, in my opinion, because every person learns differently. Every person has different backgrounds. And if you remember what I mentioned earlier, I like to build that diverse team. So I don't expect everybody to whiteboard the same, to solve problems the same. So I have to spend a little extra time helping and coaching and developing that way. So that would be my approach kind of day one. And it seems to work pretty well.
I do have so many other questions, but I want to follow up with this. If someone doesn't have you as a manager, someone doesn't have someone who's actually following up and holding people accountable, as an individual SE, what should I be doing without an accountability manager, I guess, like to get better at my job?
Yeah, I would say never stop learning. I mean, it's the same thing for me. I was listening to a couple podcasts this weekend just on a couple pieces of technology that I needed to brush up on. And I think there's enough material out there that you can put things on a little faster, to 1.5, 2 times on the speed to kind of zip through it. But never stop learning. I also think you need to build relationships across other teams, and even things like this, like learning a bunch from both of you guys today. So I think you have to take the initiative. There's nothing wrong with just doing what's asked of you on your daily job as an SC. But if you, in my opinion, want to gravitate to that next level, get yourself involved in other projects, both in the company externally, continue to learn. It is a craft. It is, it's in my opinion, we're almost, doing shipbuilding here. You can continue to just, sand the wood and varnish it and it will sail. But if you really want to make that unbelievable craft that will float on the water, you have to control your learning curve and your ability to say, I'm not going to just do the minimum. And it's no different than whether it's sports or it's scientists. If you look at everybody that has been successful, they've looked at that and said, I'm going to do more. And that's where you have to kind of focus and push your leadership team on there. So I think on the technology side, always understand what's out there, but also understand that you can't be an expert in everything. So try to be your generalist so you can have that high level conversation, but know that if you have to go find concrete answers to a specific solution, you know where to go.
Nice. Yeah.
And maybe just to add on to that too, like it might be an extreme position as well, but even if it means sometimes leaving if you're not happy kind of in the situation where you're maybe having to drive all your own learning and maybe it's not being reciprocated in any way, then don't be afraid to change your situation as well if necessary, because you might find yourself way happier to have done so.
Yeah. And that's where it's so paramount for SE leaders to build that culture. I can tell you that, one company I had just this unbelievable SE director team that held me accountable on a daily basis. Because there was times where I knew I was going to get on a call and not get chewed out, but it was like, Gary, we are not doing these 3 things in the organization. How do we go fix this? Like our team needs this. And it was good because, again, it was a big company. It was hard to move things around in an exponential fashion, but it was good because the team felt that if there was a blind spot that Gary didn't understand, to go do that, because I didn't want the team to change. I was very proud that we had less than 1% turnover in our 300-person organization. And to me, that's important, right? Because if I'm sitting there saying, you need to go follow me, do all these great things, but I'm actually not doing anything for you, to me, that's lip service. And I think there's too many people in this industry that will go out there and do all these blogs and books and say all these great things about leadership. But try leading a team when your market share is a commodity, your margins are under 40%, and the industry is paying folks in your team, 20% more, and your company won't give you that raise. So you have to go, that's when leadership comes in. That's when you have to dig in and say, okay, how do I make this interesting and keep people wanting to stay? Because it's not just about the money, it's about how we're all in this together. And you're absolutely right. Because if you're not getting that type of environment and the company has a ton of cash, they're paying everybody, 20% more than the industry, there's all kinds of cool technology, but the culture is terrible, I've seen people leave too. Because generally SEs will not leave just for compensation.
Yep. Right. Again, I could talk to you for hours, but I want to talk about your podcast a little bit. So you started your own podcast, and I also want to talk about your new business. So maybe we can start off with why you started your podcast, what it's called, and where can people find out more about it?
Yeah. So I think we were talking about this before the show. This is where I probably struggle the most. I hate talking about myself. So I'll probably glance over at very high level. So,
okay.
So about a year ago, I started a podcast called Solutions for Customers, which just focused on sales engineering and customer success, because I think there's a lot of folks talking about customer success, but they forget about us on the pre-sale side and how we're so intertwined with customers. And people have been after me for a while to do ebooks and kind of take my knowledge and put it down. And I just don't have time to sit still and do that. So I just said, well, why don't I just get on a podcast and I'll start interviewing folks. I'm not looking to interview founders. I wanted to interview folks that are in the field, the sales engineers, CSMs, and those leaders. And that's all I've done. So it's just a kind of a free-flowing podcast to talk about what I've learned and what other people are learning, because like I mentioned before, I still have to learn. So it's great having folks like yourself on to hear what's going on in the industry, what you're doing, the challenges that you have, because I can't become a better professional if I don't know, what's in the front of the windshield, not the rearview mirror. So that's what we've done. We're in about 30 countries. I haven't really advertised it, but we're just launching a site this week called solutionsforcustomers.com. Not as nice as your site, Ramsey. I got to say, I'm super impressed with everything that you're doing. Just the content that you and Vinny have been putting together, and the resources. I commend you for that. And so hopefully your listeners are taking advantage of that, because that's what we need, right? And so I got into this because I've found some success, and I wanted to share that, what I've learned, and then, try to explain to folks what I've found that doesn't work, so they don't fall into the same trap. And so then what I'm doing now is I've just recently left Oracle post our acquisition from the couple years ago. Could have stayed. Great company. They're doing a lot of great things on Oracle Cloud infrastructure, and that was part of the team I was with. But I really felt passionate about sales engineering. So myself and another former SE leader that I've worked with in the past have just, and a couple others, have co-founded Macronet Services. So it will be a channel aligned organization that focuses on management consulting, telecom consulting, cloud consulting. So it allows me to continue going back to my roots, which is, being a sales engineer. And, we'll be focused on solving a lot of workload challenges from layer 1 through 3. And then I'm also moonlighting at times through that organization, helping customers build SE organizations. So if they are down a leader, I can come and step in on an interim basis and help them find the permanent SE leader, the CS leader, whatever that might be, and just have some fun at it. So pretty excited about it.
Nice. Well, congratulations. I'm on your
Thank you.
website. Your website looks pretty good.
It's getting there. It's not, it'll be, by the time this broadcast gets posted, all the content will be up there and everything will be working. But as you know, when you're working a full-time job and you're putting this content up, it can be challenging.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing it, and I'll be definitely following your progress on the podcast. And if you can send me the link to Macronet Services, because I could not find it the other day.
Oh, okay.
I'll be happy to put it on the show notes, which is show 115, wetheSalesEngineers.com/show 115.
That's awesome. I'm so happy that you've got over 100 episodes. I mean, that's
Thanks.
Both of you guys have done such a great job. I'm really impressed. I've listened to a slew of the episodes. I love the content that you guys are putting out and the people that you're having on. This is really good for what we need in the ecosystem.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. We usually do the not so fire round and then not so fire round succession, but I think for today we might have to go a little bit quicker just due to the time constraint that we have. So, Benny, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. So, this has been a great discussion all around about whether it be sales engineering or how it kind of tie into other aspects of an organization, say or the relationship with CS or just with a customer post sales or whatever, maybe even internally within an SC organization, all the different dynamics that are going on. What's one thing that you would say you would love a lot, or what's the thing you love the most about being either an SC or an SC leader in any of the situations that you've been in?
So as an SC, the thing that I love the most is the technology always changes. You get exposed to the latest and greatest. You're on the front line of what's coming about it. If I look at when I got in the industry, the internet was just kind of taking hold, and it's just been a wild ride. So as an SC, if you're not jazzed up about what you can learn and the things that you get exposed with, then take a good look around where you're at. I think that's the most exciting. As a leader, I will tell you the most exciting thing that I enjoy is watching SEs get to that next level, whether it's a specific solution architect in a practice or they become a leader themselves. And those are the two things. I mean, you can go close quota and you can go win all the awards you want. I like watching people. I like taking a step back and watching their success. And to me, that's the most rewarding as a leader.
Nice.
Awesome.
All right. Question number 2. I almost spoke in French. What would be one thing you would change about your job?
The one thing that I would change about my job. So the one thing I would change about my job is I would really focus on developing the sales leaders to have a better understanding of what we do. They understand that, we're valuable and we do all these, great things to help close a deal, but I don't think they truly understand our practice and the challenge that we have. That would be the thing that I would focus on the most.
Nice. All right.
Cool. All right. Question 3. What would you say are you've already mentioned some good books and resources today already, like Strength Finders being one, and then you mentioned Michael Scott as well for CS related things.
Mm-hmm.
what are some other, or maybe those as well, but what are some other books, tools, and resources you'd recommend for any budding SE or SE leader?
Yeah, I think so. I would definitely, I have to reiterate Strength Finders. I think what it does is just gives you an independent view from a technology standpoint. You know, what your personality traits are, but you can also see how others are. And the reason why that book to me is so important is that, you know, there's different personalities of a salesperson that you support, or that you are supporting, you know, different cohort. And if you understand their personality traits, their strengths, that helps you become a better SC, because you know which salesperson might be the control freak, which one, you know, is super behind the eight ball and doesn't understand how to set up things for a meeting. Like there's ways that Strength Finder book really talks about it. There's you know, for an SE leader, I think, you know, I really think, you know, Carnegie's book, it's
How to win friends and influence people.
yeah, I think that one's a decent one as an early one, that I've read it a couple times, early on in my career. I mean, I think any kind of leadership book, you know, out there kind of tells you how to be a leader, but to be a specific SE leader, you know, maybe that's something I have to kind of write, or we all kind of chip in on and write, because I don't think it necessarily exists. I think, you know, if you can focus on any sort of leadership books that focus on empathy and compassion, that's what's going to make you a better leader. And there's a ton of them out there.
Nice. I just went on Amazon.ca, so the Canadian Amazon, and it seems that Strength Finder, the Kindle edition, is more expensive than the hardcover.
Get the hardcover, because you can put, I like it because you can put notes in there. It's got your key code in there. I think probably on the Kindle version as well. We used that a couple jobs ago, in parallel with the Challenger sale. So I think every SC should probably read the Challenger sale, because most of your sales organizations are probably focused on that. But yeah, definitely don't. I would say I would recommend not buying Strength Finders at a used book sale, because somebody probably already used the key code in there, and you won't understand what your strengths are.
Okay, so like there's an online exam that you have to go through?
Yeah, it's a quick survey. I don't think it collects any information personally. It's just more of just building a profile on you, and because they've done thousands of profiles, so they, you know, you can try. Yeah, I know some SCs are, I'm going to try to trick the system. It ends up figuring you out anyway.
Okay. All right. Last question, or question before last, I guess. What separates great SEs from the okay or not so good ones?
I'd say two core skills: listening, which is the number one skill of every SE, and just communication.
So you have a podcast early on all about listening. So which episode was that? I need to check it out. I'll link that in the show notes so people can go listen to it. But you talk about core skill listening, and you just go through that. So that was a good show.
Yeah, you have to, right? Because our tendency is to say, let me just throw up all this tech and tell you how great we are. And some customers want to hear that, but you have to understand what their pain is. You have to listen and hear those key components that will help you drive your conversation better, your demo better, in my opinion. And the SEs that don't listen, and they only want people to listen to how smart they are, customers just look at them and go, well, you know, they're just a bunch of hot air. You know, I guess I'll look at the tech at some point. And that's the thing. When I was getting back to the sales leadership piece, a lot of sales leaders don't understand that sometimes SEs are the ones that torpedo deals. It's not the sales rep. It's not the product. It is the way that we might have gone in there and not listened, not prepared, not done and performed the right research ahead of time, and had poor communication skills, where the customer's like, yeah, I'm just not going to buy.
Yeah.
And the same token, right? It could also be a really well-communicated SE that really does listen, know how to understand, and know how to articulate value, that could kind of skyrocket a deal from just being something that somebody's lightly considering to really being the go-to solution. So yeah, definitely comes down to listening.
Well, and you as an SE that's a great point, Benny, because I think if you don't understand your ability to shape a deal, you're doing yourself and the team a disservice. So I always use this like kind of quick, like analogy, like kind of storyline of, hey, you're my sales rep and I'm your SE, and we could walk into a customer and Benny goes, hey, to the customer, nice blue sky day today. And he goes, no, it's not. It's not blue. And then you go, no. I'm your SE. Hold on. It is. It's like a nice, like navy kind of baby blue. And they look at me and they go, you're absolutely right. It's a blue sky. They're going to naturally listen and trust some of the things that I say because of the negative connotation that is sometimes associated with frontline sales professionals. And if you don't understand that as an SE and take that very seriously, because you don't want to take advantage of that, if you don't understand that, then you're already, I would say, 50% behind the eight ball in that role as an SE.
Yep. Yeah. Last question of the day. If
Sure.
people want to reach out to connect with you, where can they do that?
I don't know why they'd want to do that, but I would say the best thing to do is shoot me a note on LinkedIn. It's just G Sloper. I'm on LinkedIn. And the only reason why I say that is that way I can understand what your background is. So if you ask me a question like, hey, this is what I want to do, and I don't know your background, at least I can look at your LinkedIn profile. Or you can, if you really want to be formal, you can shoot a note on the Solutions for Customers website. But just link in with me on LinkedIn. I link in with pretty much everybody. I want to hear what you're doing and see if I can help, or maybe you can help me.
Okay. So we'll have your LinkedIn link on our show notes, wetheSalesEngineers.com/show 115, as well as your podcast link, since I found it. So, it's my pleasure.
You're the one. You're the one.
Yeah. I'm the one who found it. All right. Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate your time. This was an amazing conversation.
Likewise, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. Likewise. See ya.
All right. Well, thanks, Gary, for coming on. I could ask Gary questions for hours. Like, I don't feel like we touched on, maybe we touched on the topics that we didn't want to talk about, but we didn't dig deep into most of them. We just focused on basically one, leadership between SEs and SE leaders. How did you feel?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a great, just like natural flowing conversation. Definitely covered a lot, even if it was at a relatively high level in some respects. But I think we still dove in deep into some areas, like, the relationship between SEs and their leaders, or vice versa, which I know I thought was very valuable for at least myself, and I can imagine for a lot of the people listening today as well. That just kind of understanding more about that relationship and kind of understanding the expectations that, obviously that SE leaders have of their SEs, but then even vice versa, kind of having an expectation of what leaders maybe should be doing, and kind of the mindset that they should be having when approaching individual contributors to allow them to be great, was a great insight. And I think a lot of people on both sides of the fence can take a lot from that.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll just leave it at that. Like, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave a rating or review if you did enjoy it. And if there are any topics that you guys want us to talk about, let us know, because I can get Gary back on. He already offered to come back on and discuss in a little bit more depth, more things. So let me know what you guys want me to talk about or want us to talk about. So anything else?
No, I think that's everything. Hopefully everybody in the northern half of the world is enjoying their summer and staying safe, all things considered. What an interesting time nowadays. And in the bottom half of the world, hopefully winter isn't too bad. And hope everyone's doing well.
Yep. So with that, this is Ramsey and Benny signing off.